Hey you, and welcome back to the channel. Now, we cover some pretty advanced topics on this channel, and that's always fun, and there will definitely always be more of that. But it's really easy to forget that some of you are brand new to editing, and also many of you on YouTube perhaps are just getting started with DaVinci Resolve. So this week, I'm gonna give you guys not 3, not 5, not 7, but 10 different tips that I have for you guys getting started with DaVinci Resolve. Now, even if you're experienced, stick around with me because I think there's going to be points in here that you can learn from as well, or you might just be able to pick up 1 or 2 tips and tricks as well from stuff that I do. Not all of these are going to be super in-depth, like click here, click here, click here type of tips. Some of them are going to be more broad and general, but just maybe some things to get you start thinking about your editing experience in DaVinci Resolve. Now, I've made the switch permanently to editing on DaVinci Resolve and color grading in Resolve for my stuff. Somehow Premiere started giving me more trouble than it was giving me before, and I started getting these errors, and instead of trying to dive in and figure out what was going on with all of that, I figured since I was already color grading and all of my workflow there was already set up, I would just switch my editing as well, and it's been butter smooth the whole time. Now, just before we jump in though, if you aren't already subscribed, please go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It really helps me and the channel out a lot to get these videos out to you. Also, if you're already subscribed, thank you so much. Make sure you hit the like button, share this video with someone, and we can really get this video out there. So let's jump in with number 1 right now, which is learning the layout. Now, if you're coming from a program like Premiere where you can move all the different boxes around and set up all sorts of different layouts and save them as custom layouts, this may feel very new to you. I actually hated it at first when I got started with Resolve, but to be honest with you, this feature really grew on me that the layout in Resolve is actually fixed. I actually much prefer it now since I know where everything is and nothing really gets hidden. I can move different things in and out of the layout. For example, on the cut page, I have the inspector window here and I can toggle it in and out. The inspector will always be there though, so I know where to find it every single time. With Premiere, I always had the trouble of like my media browser being hidden behind all of the other windows open in the same box. A lot of times on the default layout, if you don't take the time to clean everything out and close some of those windows that you never use, they'll just always be there cluttering up your UI. And don't get me wrong, there's a time for customization, but I think it can definitely go too far. I think with Resolve, they've done a great job making everything you need to get the job done accessible and visible. Now, another part of getting used to the layout as well is knowing that Resolve doesn't have something like dynamic link, for example, where it opens a whole new program. Everything is inside of Premiere in one program. Down here, for example, you'll see the tab buttons, which are basically your different programs for Adobe. I'll dive into each one separately, but real quick, you have your media tab for importing and organizing your media. The cut and edit pages are for editing your media, but each one is a little different with their own strengths. The Fusion tab is basically After Effects or your compositor. I've been doing some graphics work in Fusion, and you can also composite and work with 3D objects as well. Your color page is what most people probably use Resolve for. This is where you'll do all of your color grading. Fairlight is for all things audio. It's set up for your monitoring and effects and EQs and all of that. And lastly, you have your Deliver tab, which is like your media encoder. You can make all of your deliverables here and export as well. Now, key binding is one of the first things that I think newcomers should get into right away. When I started editing in Resolve, I didn't take the time to do this, so I was looking all around the UI trying to find buttons and looking up key bindings to find out how to do the things that I wanted to do. Right now though, I have most things that I use regularly key bound so that I don't really have to move my left hand much when I'm editing. So I would recommend finding out what the most commonly used key bindings you use are in your program and then taking that over to DaVinci Resolve and key binding them right away. Keep in mind some things may be called something slightly different between programs, but I guarantee you Resolve probably has all of the key bindings and shortcuts you're looking for. Sometimes you just have to do a little bit of digging. Most things I could actually find pretty quickly, but if I couldn't find it, a quick Google search usually cleared it right up. I think I've mentioned some of these before, but for anyone new, these are my top used shortcuts. Q is my start to playhead, which cuts everything before the playhead. W is my split clip or add edit in Premiere, I believe. That just simply adds an edit wherever your playhead is. E, I've key bound to end to playhead. This cuts everything after the playhead in the clip that you're on. The plus and minus keys zoom in and out of the timeline. I and O, I think are default bound for mark in and out, so I didn't really change those, but it makes sense for the function. A is select all clips forward of the playhead. That's on all tracks, so basically I can create a nice gap and move things around. And then I've also key bound Option A to just select all clips forward on just the selected track I'm on. Those are really my main ones, so my hand doesn't really have to move off of like Q, W, and E most of the time when I'm editing, so that way I can move through my clips pretty fast. Now that's the majority of my edits on the edit page. For the cut page, I usually use all of the shortcuts on my speed editor keyboard. I've done a video on this before, so if if you want more information on how I use the speed editor, go check out my video, which I'll link in the corner and also in the description below that you can watch after this video. I think it's well worth the investment, and this speed editor keyboard has actually saved me a lot of time, and I think it's fairly intuitive and easy to work with. One of the big things too is that if you're editing multi-camera angles, they have this section of the keyboard here that specifically deals with different camera angles and editing in different cameras as you go along, which I think is really useful. Speaking of the speed editor, it's a perfect companion, like I said, for the cut page. So make sure you don't skip the cut page, and that's number 3. As I mentioned before, I think the cut page is usually pretty misunderstood. Either people skip it completely or they just use it exclusively instead of using both the cut and the edit pages together. I think the strongest use case is for the cut page to be used in conjunction with the edit page. Very often when I'm editing my videos, for example, I start on the cut page, I make my initial edits and big cuts, and then after that I move over to the edit page where I can refine and also start stacking audio layers, that sort of thing. So it's really helpful to use them in conjunction with each other. Now there are a lot of different ways to work with the cut page, so I encourage you guys to go out there and look for different ways people use the cut page and then incorporate some of those same things into your workflow if it makes sense. Some people like to work with in and out points while going through all of their clips. You can then drop them into the timeline. Source tape is another way to work, which will make a continuous reel of all your clips you have in your folder, and that way you can play through and scroll through all of them, which is actually pretty helpful, especially if you want to see all takes of a scene, for example. Once your clips are on the timeline, it's also very easy to scroll through everything while also having a view of your entire timeline up here. I'll use the speed editor for this, but if you select jog, which is the one I'm usually on, you can use the wheel to scroll through a clip pretty easily. The scroll function can let you quickly go through the entire timeline, and it's very useful to scrub large amounts of footage quickly. A couple of really cool features can be found here in the timeline options. If you actually click on these icons, you can create subtitles right here from your audio tracks, for example. There's also this one called trim to audio. It's very useful for editing my YouTube videos where, let's say you go to the beginning of a clip and you want to adjust the in point. I can hold in on my speed editor and it'll automatically switch the track to the audio wave view, so I can know exactly where to trim it to. No more having to expand the audio track or zoom in and out so you can see what you're doing. It does it automatically for you, which I think is really great. All right, so let's say you're done with your initial clips and your audio and all that kind of stuff, but now you want to add those finishing touches to your video. Things like titles and... Oh, but wait a second, motion graphic templates and stuff like that don't actually transfer between programs like Premiere and Resolve, so what do we do now? Okay, so I'll admit this is actually one of the most tedious points that I have on this list, but hear me out. Now, after editing on another software for years and years, you tend to build up a library of things like motion graphics and sounds and titles and all that kind of stuff that you use over there, and they don't really transfer very easily between software. I'll admit this is actually one of my biggest hangups in switching programs from Premiere to Resolve. At some point though, you have to be intentional and just bite the bullet and kind of force yourself to transfer your assets or even rebuild some like I did in Resolve or whatever program you're switching to in order to actually be able to function in that program just as fast as you were in the other one. Like for example, my new subscribe button, I actually went ahead and redid the whole thing in Fusion myself. One, because I wanted to learn how to get better with Fusion, and two, I also just needed my subscribe button as well. My other one happened to be a motion graphic in Premiere, and that didn't transfer over. There are other ways to do it as well. For example, you can export some motion graphics as just a MOV file or whatever, and then bring it over to your other programs. Whichever way really you decide to do it is up to you, but just take the time to transfer those assets so that way you're not going back and forth between programs or having to transfer your files over just to get something like a title, for example. Once I got that out of the way though, I felt much better with my decision to move over to Resolve. Another area that I think is really worth sinking some extra time into is finding those hidden or pro features that not a lot of people talk about and that are probably a little bit more hidden inside the UI. There are, of course, tutorial videos like mine that you can watch if you want to find some of this stuff, or there's also articles online that you can go to look these up quickly. These can really help your productivity and just make using the software a lot better. For example, it took me a while to learn that I can use power bins in Resolve. Now, these are very similar to power grades, so if you don't know about that, we can actually cover both here. Essentially, both of these features allow you to carry your either color grades or file folders with you from project to project, so that they're always accessible. Let's say two things I need for every video are my subscribe button and my outro background. I can come here to my media pool on any page in Resolve and see my power bins. Select my YouTube templates folder and there they are. These will show up on every single project. If you don't see these, then click on the three little dots in the media pool window and select show power bins. And that's the same thing with the power grades as well. If you go to your gallery tab up here in the top left and you enable your folders, you can see a power grades folder here. Now, speaking of color grading, it's a little bit different in Resolve if you're coming from other programs like Premiere Pro, for example. If you're in Premiere Pro, then you know you likely just put an adjustment layer over your clips and drop in the Lumetri color panel since everything works in layers. In Resolve, we have nodes. Your in and out points are here and you grade on individual nodes in between these in and out points. My rule of thumb is 1 change per node. That way, if I need to enable or disable a change to see what it's doing, it's only affecting that 1 change and not my whole entire grade. This also lets me think more critically about my grade, asking what step will bring me to an end result rather than just jumping in and making a bunch of changes that aren't tracked separately and visible. Now, besides that, there are also different nodes and it helps to know each one. Obviously, the most common is the single serial node. These string together from left to right, or your in and out points with each change you make feeding into the next node. Now, we also have parallel nodes, and an advantage with parallel nodes is that you can make changes to different parts of an image simultaneously, and then those changes are mixed together and passed on. And the great part of a parallel node is that it can share the same input image without passing along your changes in the top node. So let's look at this image as an example to illustrate what I'm talking about. I have my color management done here on the outside nodes. I'm just taking this from Arri Log 4 into DaVinci Wide Gamut, and then from DaVinci Wide Gamut into Rec 709. In the middle, I'm going to add a parallel node here by going Option P, and Resolve will add the node plus this parallel mixer node here. If we follow the node tree, you'll see that both of these parallel nodes are actually receiving as an input the original transformed image, which is great. The changes I make up top aren't going to affect the changes on the bottom node, and this parallel mixer will then mix my changes in both the nodes equally and spit out an output that will flow into the next node. So for example, I can come to my qualifier and pull a luminance key here just to block out the sky, and then just soften that up to make a smooth transition. I can then come to the bottom node and do the same thing in the opposite direction to get the water. Then I can do things like go to my secondaries here and shift this more towards teal, go up to the first node, for example, and let's say warm this up a little bit. And you can see both nodes get mixed into one output now, and I can continue on grading after this with both of my parallel nodes feeding into the next node. Moving on from that, I also covered the layer mixer, which is another node in a previous video of mine that I've done on the channel as well, so go check that out. In that video, I show you how to use this node, the layer mixer, to adjust and modify LUTs, which is actually pretty cool. Once again, I'll link that in the top of the video and also down below in the description to watch that later. And essentially, the layer mixer is the same as a parallel node, but instead of mixing your grades equally, it gives priority to the bottom node. Another common node I use is the outside node. So for example, let's say I have this qualifier for my node, but I want to select everything outside of that. I can just hit Option O and it'll add this outside node with everything outside of my original key selected already. It does that by passing along the key selection info with this blue line right here automatically, and then inverts it to select everything else. I promise I'd go back and talk about all the other pages in Resolve as well, so here we are with tip number 7, use every page. Yes, you can do a lot of things from the cut and the edit pages as well, but jumping into each specialized page gives you access to tools that you wouldn't normally have in some of the other views. For example, on the edit page, you have access to a mixer where you can adjust track volumes and even do things like panning. But if we go into Fairlight, which is the audio page, you have access to a more specialized view. Your mixers here, your effects, your track level effects, dynamic tools, and so much more. There are a bunch of features like this to discover on each page, like I said, so just jump in and mess around and you'll find a special use case for each page. Now, it's a little misleading for tip number 8 to say learn color grading the correct way, because there are a lot of different ways that you can achieve a good end result. But generally, if you learn from people that have been doing it for a while, you'll see that there's usually a little bit of a better way to achieve good looking results that are usually a little bit easier. You don't need overly complicated node trees that look like this, for example. You don't really need to jump into your images clip by clip and just start twisting knobs. Sometimes a certain look just may not be optimal for the type of footage and aesthetic that you have, and you have to be upfront and honest about that as well when you're grading with different people. The best part though is that if you learn some simple ground rules, there's plenty of room to play within those to achieve a great looking result. But the foundation needs to be good so that you have a good basis to learn everything else as well. Color grading and color science have actually come a long way now since when they were first introduced and people understand more about it. So things like using proper color management, simplifying your grades, knowing knowing what are the proper tools to use for different scenarios, all of this can help you and create a better look in the end. Now, I try to give you guys the best information that I have, and that's also out there as well as I learn too. So if you guys have stuck with me this far, thank you so much. Make sure you guys are hitting that subscribe button too for more of this type of knowledge. I actually have a video on this topic that I'm currently working on about how to achieve really great results with simple grades. So make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell so you don't miss those videos. We're almost done, and we kind of talked about this one already, but power grades. Power grades are one of the best time savers to use in DaVinci Resolve. Essentially, like I've said, power grades are like power bins. You can bring them with you from project to project. They contain the color grades you've already done and saved, including the node tree as well. In order to set one up, you just have to grade your image and then make sure you go over to the gallery section. Then you can right click on the image and select grab still. Instead of going into your typical stills folder, which is project specific, it'll go into your power grades folder. I always use it now, and it's been a real time saver, and not to mention you don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, so you can become more consistent as well. All right, last one, but this is one that I also struggled with way too much, and it's to fully commit. This is the easiest time when you're learning a software to give up the easiest, because you can just say, hey, I have all my stuff over here. I already know how to use that. So just forget all of this. I'm going to go back to what I know. I'll just do the color grading in Resolve, for example, because that's easy and I already have that set up. That's what I kept saying for the longest time, even though I kept running into problems in other places as well. But it was just more convenient for me to stick with that because I didn't put the time in to actually fully commit and switch. Learning a new system is always tough, but I think it's definitely worth it, especially if you get improvements in certain areas like less crashes or better things that you can do with the software right up front, or you don't have to pay a subscription anymore. That's a big one for a lot of people as well. The key thing is set up a time frame for yourself with a reasonable, achievable goal for yourself as well, whether that be fully learning the software or transferring assets like we talked about in prior steps, but have an achievable goal that you can look at and say, by this time I should have everything done. Now, obviously, if you have professional clients that just want you to use a certain software because it integrates better with their workflow, then that's a different story. But I think you still have time to learn as much as possible if you want to use a different software, let's say for personal reasons. If anything, you'll just have it for yourself and for your other projects as well. Lastly, I'm not even saying you have to quit all the other programs you're using. For example, I'll still be using Adobe, and not just Premiere, but Photoshop and other resources that they have, because I think they're great tools. But if you can force yourself into a situation where you have to learn Resolve, I think it'll be that much more helpful for you anyway. All right, so that's where I'm going to leave it for this video. Hopefully the tips that I gave you give you some idea of where to start or how to progress in your journey. Whether that's just because you're stuck and you want to learn something new, or if you're like me and think that it'll just be a better move for you in general. Now, obviously, everybody's journey is going to look differently, so don't take these tips as the only way that you can do something, but I think these 10 can get you started or at least set you on the right path. If you want me to dive into anything more specifically, then comment down in the comment section below and let me know what you'd like to hear, and let me know what you'd like as a follow-up. If you've stuck around this long till the very end, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button down below, comment, share, all the things to get this video out there. And until next time, go out there and create something. La vedere.